Welcome to the world of Telly.
Hi, I'm Neil.
And I'm John.
And you're listening to World of Telly, the podcast where John and I watch every single TV programme ever made in no particular order. And what are we watching this week, John?
We're watching Artemis 81.
Artemis 81? What's that?
Artemis 81 is a film that was transmitted on BBC One on the 29th of December, so in the Christmas holidays, at 9 o'clock on BBC One.
It was actually broadcast the day after K9 and Company in December 1981.
In 1981, but the 81 of the title has got nothing to do with the year. It's very important we clarify that. So it was shown in peak time, and it was 3 hours 5 minutes long, near enough. Very awkward length, because when it was doing the rounds, as pirate videos back in the day, it was too big for an E180 tape. And it was also, bizarrely, when we got into the world of recordable media, it was 3 megabytes too large to fit on a CD-R. So it's extremely awkward. Though it did, of course, fit on a L750 Betamax tape, which was 3 hours and 15 minutes. So maybe it was the only program designed for the Betamax era.
If there's anybody out there who hasn't encountered Artemis 81 before, how would you sum it up in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, well, the best thing I can do is read out the original pitch, the one-paragraph pitch, by David Rudkin, obviously. A Danish pagan image, brought in pieces unwittingly to England by drivers on the ferry, begin to dominate their lives. People possessed unawares by their fragment of the demon are being drawn towards each other, driven on by inexplicable occurrences and irrational compulsions.
That sounds fantastic. What genre is it?
Well, that's a very good question. Sci-fi, gothic, Scandi, noir, Hitchcockian, pagan horror. I think that sums it up.
Before we describe in agonising detail what happens in Artemis 81, let's talk about the people responsible for it. So should we start with the producer? Now, we've spoken about the producer of Artemis 81 before, David Rose. We spoke about him briefly when we talked about Edge of Darkness. And I'm sure it's not the last time we'll be talking about David Rose. Who was David Rose, John?
David Rose started off his TV career as a producer. He was the first producer of Z-Cars. After producing a few more things, he then got the job as head of English regional drama, predominantly based at BBC Pebble Mill in Birmingham. He took that job because he knew he would be out of mind in terms of the BBC, who were based in the TV Centre in London, and the execs would sort of let him get on with it. He was a truly great person, David Rose. He did so much for television. I mean, Pebble Mill were allocated a certain number of slots in things like the Play for Today strand. Was responsible for some absolutely brilliant ones like The Fishing Party, Penda's Fen, also by David Rudkin, Gangsters, The Black Stuff, which led to Boys from the Black Stuff, Nuts in May. He was really into giving new writers an opportunity, particularly writers if they'd never written for television before. He actually really was enthusiastic about them. There was a series of short plays called Second City First, which gave loads of new writers their break. And, later on, he would also commission things like The History Man. And obviously things like Gangsters led to a series as well. He was responsible for Girl, which was a short play which had the first lesbian kiss on TV. A Touch of Eastern Promise, first drama on British TV with an entirely Asian cast. And also the soap opera Empire Road, which was written, acted and directed by a mainly black cast. So groundbreaking all the time. Made lots of controversial stuff. But he actively, I think in an example with probably Penda's Fen, but also certainly with Artemis 81, he basically was quite happy with the fact that he didn't understand some of the work that he was putting on. He thought that was all to the good. And he's one of the few producers who, if they got an audience, his program's got an audience reaction index score that was quite high, they were always aiming for something like 75. He'd actually be a bit worried about that. I know everybody talks about golden ages, but things could be made that would never have got made under a kind of different regime there. And as we'll maybe talk about later, things were not quite the same after he went, but he went on to a later career. The move away from English regional drama was to Channel 4, and he was responsible for Film 4.
Artemis 81 was the last thing he did for the BBC, wasn't it?
It was the last thing he commissioned. He was there for filming, or some of it, and then he left before the editing and transmission.
And this all comes from the mind of David Rudkin. Who's David Rudkin, John?
David Rudkin is a kind of how to describe him? It's very difficult. A kind of a visionary playwright, I would say. He started off as a theatre playwright. He did a play called A Four-Night Come, which is an extraordinary play that the RSC did about fruit pickers, where a student comes along to work in his holidays. Basically, it ends with a ritualistic slaughter and a beheading on stage. He did lots of translations of the Greek classics. In the 70s, his main plays were Ashes and The Sons of Light, which was staged in 1975, which was actually premiered in Newcastle, and Sting saw it, which is relevant for later. He also, for the RSC, translated the Euripides play Hippolytus, and Hippolytus features the character Artemis, the god Artemis. And of course he did Penda's Fen, which was a few years before this, which was a kind of massive success, directed by Alan Clark, again produced by David Rose, and which was about Elgar and paganism and Penda, the old king. So it's mythological. It's rooted in the country. It's rooted in the history of the land. That's, as I say, visionary, but not necessarily the most accessible playwright. Highly stylized at times as well.
Now, Artemis 81's director is Alistair Reid. Now, he had a very interesting career as well, didn't he, John?
I mean, Alistair Reid is one of those, I think in his obituary in The Guardian, because he died in 2011, he was basically his kind of versatility might have counted against him in terms of the fact that people just take him so much for granted. He was a really, really good director. He directed episodes of the TV series Gangsters, which we will definitely come onto at some point.
Definitely.
He also did a serial for Channel 4 called Traffic.
That was remade by Steven Soderbergh, wasn't it?
It was remade by Steven Soderbergh. The TV series, I think, was much, much better than the film. But then he also, over in America, he did Armistead Maupin's Tales of the City. So he was genuinely great director, much underrated.
So huge talent behind the scenes of Artemis 81. What about in front of the camera?
I need to be careful now, because all of my life and from when I was a kid, I pronounced Hewell Bennett, but it's Howell Bennett.
It's Howell.
It's Howell Bennett. So I apologise if I get that wrong again. So yeah, Hal Bennett, really big in British film in the 60s, often paired with Hayley Mills. For some reason, they seem to go together. But he was also, in lots of stuff in the 70s and beyond.
Percy.
Sorry?
Percy.
Oh, God, Percy. Yes, the penis transplant. I'd forgotten about, sorry everyone. I wasn't expecting Neil to interject with his Percy then. Yes, it was a film about a man who has a penis transplant, followed by the sequel Percy's Progress. But Hal Bennett was not in that. He was in Shelley, the sitcom, which ran for ages, actually, on and off. So he did that, but he was in a great TV series called Malice Aforethought, which is like about a 1930s poisoner. And he was absolutely fantastic in that.
He appeared in quite a few Dennis Potter plays as well, didn't he?
A very early performance of his was in Dennis Potter's play Where the Buffalo Roam in the mid-60s. And he was also in Pennies from Heaven as well. And he was in Karaoke, one of Potter's last plays as well. So, I mean, he was a fixture, wasn't he, Hal Bennett?
This shore, it is so lovely. All this place. And you. Can we stay here? Always?
The organist, the sinister organist in Artemis 81, is Dan O'Herlihy, who had a really long career, Oscar nominated, and was in RoboCop and Twin Peaks. And of course, I'm building this up now because the obvious other person that's in this is Sting, Gordon Sumner.
This is one of his first acting roles, isn't it? Although he had been in Quadrophenia.
He'd been in Quadrophenia. I think I recently did some work on the Blu-ray release of Brimstone and Treacle, the film version of Dennis Potter's play. And I think Sting, in the commentary, sort of regards Quadrophenia as just basically standing dressed up as something, not really, because he gets very few lines.
Yeah.
But he did this and then Brimstone and Treacle in rapid succession. When I was looking through the newspaper archives for this, there was so much coverage, particularly in the local press as well, Birmingham and Liverpool, which is where some of Artemis 81 was filmed there. Basically, everybody was just following Sting around. And there's umpteen photos of Sting with his top off. And there's a great line in one of the regional articles where it said, fans who turned up to see Sting were disappointed and had to settle for Hal Bennett. Which, since Hal Bennett was a bit of a pin-up in the 60s, that must hurt.
How can I care about this earth? Down there on your city motorway, a coach had slowed up in the fog. All drivers behind came ramming into him and each other at 60 miles an hour. You are worse than fools.
I believe that Rudkin and Reed both said they cast Sting purely to try and get a younger audience to watch it. It was pure stunt casting.
Of course, I suppose throughout the 70s there'd been some interesting experiments with doing this, and I was lucky enough once to be years ago now to be in a very small little kind of seminar with Nicholas Roeg, because he'd obviously used Bowie in A Man Who Fell to Earth, he'd used Art Garfunkel in Bad Timing, and he was very interesting about that. He said he wasn't getting them in there to be an actor because they're performers. He obviously worked with Jagger in performance as well, and so it's interesting what you get. But no, I think they were definitely looking at that. Yeah, at the time he was so huge, Sting.
And he plays an alien, doesn't he? Or sort of an alien.
Yes, he does.
Is he an alien?
He is. I think he's an alien. He's Helith.
He's an angel.
Well, he's an angel. I mean, he plays Helith, who's the good angel, and Roland Curran, who sadly died only just a few weeks ago, played Azrael, who's the evil one. They're two sons, and they're sons of Magog, who's a Norwegian god who's been sleeping for who knows how long, and Azrael tries to wake her up to do bad things. Roland Curran, by the way, was in El Dorado, amongst many, many other things.
Yeah, Artemis 81 has lots of familiar faces you'll probably recognise. For example, Daniel Day-Lewis turns up. It's his first screen performance, I believe.
It is. He's quite short, but he plays a student who's very well versed in classical literature. And then you get Ingrid Pitt turning up as the Hitchcock blonde.
I don't think she has a line of dialogue.
No, she basically, in the end, doesn't she? Just tries to unzip Hal Bennett's flies. That's what they got her in for. And smokes quite a lot. That's the other thing.
And then dies horribly.
Yes.
Just like most of the women in this film.
Yes.
But there's another big actor that we haven't mentioned yet.
No.
And that's Alison Hammond.
I have to say, even though I'm a fan of Artemis 81 and I've watched it quite a few times, I had no idea about the Alison Hammond connection. And one thing I didn't expect myself to be doing on a Wednesday night was searching in Google for Alison Hammond Artemis 81. That's not a timeline that I was expecting. You found an interview with her, didn't you?
Well, she talks about how her first claim to fame before Big Brother was starring in a film with Daniel Day-Lewis and Sting, as if she shares any scenes with them, which she doesn't. She literally is in the film for about 81 seconds.
Something like that, yeah. She's both living and dead. She shows all of her range in that. It's quite something.
It's also a weird programme in the sense that it was originally going to be funded with Danish money, is that right?
Yeah, it was going to be a co-production. And David Rudkin, he was told that it would be a Danish co-production. And because, Denmark and Scandinavia has got the kind of mythology, the kind of thing that Rudkin really loves, he went full in on this. So throughout Artemis 81, apart from the fact they go to Denmark and they're on a ferry between Denmark and the UK, there are loads of little references all the way through to Danes. There's a lot of Bergman in it, and some of the dialogue sounds a bit like Bergman's Scenes from a Marriage, which was shown in an English version in the 70s in the UK. We'll get on to how everybody speaks maybe in a bit. But unfortunately, he'd written the entire script and then the co-production fell through. And it was far too late at that point to do anything about it.
Well, the whole organ thing, that's like a reference to Scandinavia, isn't it? So
yeah.
They couldn't really change it, could they? Really?
No, there's references to the films of Dreyer as well, and it's just so actually it's interesting because it kind of adds to the slightly uncanny thing about it that it's got all of these things, but they were there. The reason that they were there in the first place completely vanished.
Do you think we should attempt to explain to our listeners exactly what happens in Artemis 81?
Yes,
it's quite hard to describe, isn't it?
It's very hard to describe Artemis 81. I'll kind of have a quick run at it. Yeah, I mean, basically how it starts, as I mentioned before, is that there's a planet with two suns, And literally there are two suns in the sky, like a binary system, and there are two suns which are played by, there's Helith and there's Azrael, and Helith is good and Azrael is bad. And the mother starts to wake up, and the mother is obviously Magog, who's bad news. Sting tries to say, don't do it, don't wake up, but she does. And then you know that there's trouble coming. Then we go to a North Sea ferry. And now I have to drop in the priceless bit of information, that it is the same ferry that the series 2 and 3 of Triangle were filmed on. The Dana Anglia is the name of the ship. And yes, Triangle, which was a much derided soap opera. Not long after this, actually, in the early 80s. So they're on a ferry, and there's a disparate group of people on this ferry. The main eye-catching figure is Albrecht von Drachenfels. And he's the organist, world-renowned, revered organist.
And everybody recognises him.
Weirdly, everybody knows who he is, because as we know, all organists are instant kind of like,
This whole ferry is full of Radio 3 listeners.
Yes, exactly. So on the ferry, there's Anthony Steele, the actor, who's also got, my God, what a story he has. This was pretty much the last thing that he was in. He was a matinee idol in the sort of 50s and 60s, but had a very complicated love life, and things sort of fell apart for him. He's playing a sort of director whose star is on the wane, and he's looking for, kind of new projects with somebody who a colleague is working with. You've got a priest with his family. You've got Alison Hammond's family, who are just a normal family, mother, father, two kids. There's a lorry driver who's got a freezer lorry. And you've also got, kind of one of the key characters is Gwen, played by Dinah Stab. And she is a trainee organist. I don't really know how to describe. She's basically...
What are the chances?
Yes, exactly. Take any North Sea ferry in the 1980 and you're always going to have these kind of BBC types on there. But anyway, so Gwen goes over to Albrecht von Drachenfels. I should have said, right at the very start, you see Drachenfels in a museum in Denmark looking at a small statue, which we later gather is Magog. So that's a very important bit.
He steals it, doesn't he?
He basically steals it. She comes over to him to talk about being an organist, and Drachenfels is strangely responsive. And he talks again to her later. And the other passengers, particularly the Anthony Steele character, Tristram, brilliantly named Tristram Guise, he looks across and he's taking a great interest in this. He also goes to get some pills on the car deck of the ferry at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he sees Drachenfels, moving around suspiciously.
What does Drachenfels want on the car deck at 2 a.m.?
His pills, too. We're all the same drug culture.
I saw him walk aboard at Esbjerg. He doesn't have a car on board.
I should check your boot.
I hope not.
I hope not. How English can you get?
So they get to Harwich, and you see the scene of them all departing and sort of chatting to each other as they're getting off. It then gets quite odd, basically very dark, very quickly. The black family, with Alison Hammond in the car, they drive straight home, straight into the garage. The father gasses them all with carbon monoxide.
Yeah.
Tristram, the filmmaker, director, he rings his wife to say that he's coming back and he'll get in the early hours of the morning. He pulls into the drive, and she knows he's there, but there seems to be some kind of friction between them anyway. But he doesn't come in, and he just drives off, and he drives to a very deep lake and drowns himself. Then you see the lorry driver with the freezer compartment has stopped his lorry and just frozen himself to death in the back of the lorry. And then you find out later that the priest has burnt himself to death.
Yeah, set himself on fire. Yeah.
So...
yes. You could be mistaken for thinking you're watching like an episode of Hammer House of Horror for the first 30 minutes, I would say.
But only shot in a very different kind of way, isn't it? That's the thing that's interesting. It's quite understated.
It's bleak.
It's very bleak. And the upshot of that is that Drachenfels, or the mysterious power of Magog, and particularly Roland Curran's character Azrael, have somehow managed to split Magog, the statue of Magog, and put a piece of it in each of the cars or the transport, and it has had this terrible effect on the victims. But the main character is the extraordinary name Gideon Harlax, who is played by Hal Bennett.
He's a sci-fi author, isn't he? He's basically like Garth Marenghi.
Yes, he's got that vibe, hasn't he? He sits in his either in his office or he's in his Winnebago that he has, a doormobile that he has, and fiddles with his IBM golf ball typewriter. And when I say he fiddles with this, you get a lot of this IBM golf ball typewriter. You get a lot of the IBM golf ball typewriter catalogue in there as well.
The fonts catalogue. Yeah.
The fonts catalogue you get, which is in there. Now, Gideon is sort of, you can't call him and Gwen together, but she's obviously keener on him than he is on her. And there's a whole kind of homosexual subtext to a lot of what's going on with Gideon as well.
Yeah. He's emotionally distant, isn't he? That's the whole thing.
Totally. And he starts picking up on the TV about some of the tragedies that have happened. But then he also, because Drachenfels is specifically, because Gwen had spoken about Gideon, Drachenfels says he invites them basically to come and see him, and Gwen will play for him. Now that happens, Drachenfels meets Gideon, and it goes very badly for Gwen. She's obviously not very good, or not up to the Drachenfels standard. But you also see there is Roland Curran's character, Azrael, the evil one, and it's clearly got some power over Drachenfels. And part of that power, we later find out, is that Drachenfels' wife is very ill and is sort of prevented from dying in this sort of underground hospital kind of ICU unit or something.
It's very Hammer horror.
Yeah.
Terence Fisher kind of directed sequence where he looks like Dracula, doesn't he?
He looks exactly like Dracula. So it's leaning into all of those things as well. And I mean, the important thing to remember is this was commissioned as 2 parts. And to me, it's very obvious where the end of the episode was meant to be. So really kind of cutting to the chase a little bit, we should include the fact that Hal Bennett's character, Gideon, has a friend called Jed, who's a film lecturer and is obsessed with Hitchcock. And also Jed is clearly quite into Gideon, but Gideon won't access those parts of his personality.
There are lots of allusions to Vertigo in particular.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll come back to that, because the Vertigo bits are really interesting, particularly because of the status of that film at the time. But yeah, lots and lots of references. In fact, there's so many stills from Hitchcock in this, in one particular scene, that the DVD version is edited because of copyright. But the climax, I think, of episode 1, as it was originally commissioned, was that it's quite eerie. All of the family members of the victims leave their house and they all converge on the church where Drachenfels is with Azrael. And as that's happening, Hal Bennett starts to realise what's going on. And he's also found the head of the Magog statue in Gwen's car. And at this point, he's got his doormobile on the edge of a cliff, which I think is deliberately quite funny, that there's a telephone box
in the middle of nowhere.
In the middle of nowhere on this cliff. And he tries to get hold of Gwen, runs to the telephone box, and as he's trying to get hold of her, his doormobile explodes. Massive explosion. And immediately after that, you see all the family members converging with and being smiled at by Azrael. The reason that's obviously the end is more because what happens in the next scene is Hal Bennett is now sort of virtually fallen down a cliff, and a helicopter comes to rescue him. And who is his rescuer? It's Sting.
My van blew up. Virtually my home, all my work. Welcome, Gideon, aboard. You're going to be out of action quite some while.
What on earth possessed them to run it as a 3-hour film rather than 2 90-minuters?
Well, that's the great question. I don't know, and I should add that I've spoken to a great friend of mine, Ian Greaves, who's just about, literally this week, his book about Penda's Fen is coming out. And he doesn't know either. He doesn't know definitively. But my suspicion is that the BBC wanted to get it out of the way within one go because it was so opaque. I could be wrong.
Were they worried that people wouldn't come back for part 2? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think that it's just, it's almost like ripping the plaster off, in one go, isn't it, quickly, rather than having it out there. Because the other thing that's quite weird, we may as well talk about it now, is that when this went out on that quite now, it would be really inexplicable to have something like this on at 9 o'clock on the 29th of December on BBC One. On ITV at the same time, they had the RSC's production of Chekhov's Three Sisters, which ran for 3.5 hours. And so, you sort of think about the Christmas viewers thinking, what the hell? And it's no surprise that The Apartment, the Billy Wilder film, was on BBC Two, and that was the highest rated BBC Two programme over that period, really unsurprisingly.
Do you think ITV and BBC entered into a suicide pact?
I do, but I haven't got anything to base that on. I think they had a quiet, informal word and put them out against each other. I think Ian has a similar opinion to that, but I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that, because it would have been done off the books. But it's a weird coincidence, isn't it, that the two most indigestible things that would be most likely to have a popular audience running miles are put on against each other. Seems likely, doesn't it?
Did you watch it when it went out?
I absolutely did.
You did? You were allowed to watch it?
I was. I would have been 13. And the thing is, we had a portable. And I think I watched the beginning of it, and then they wanted to watch The Apartment, so I went and watched it, and then came in and watched the rest of it in colour.
Can you remember what your feelings were at the time?
I was entranced by it.
Right.
I was totally entranced by it because I just couldn't understand any of it. Mm-hmm. But I was particularly gripped, and still am, by what happens shortly after the start, part 2, if you like, when it goes on, because to me, that is when it gets extraordinary, particularly in terms of the imagery. But just to explain, there's after the explosion, Sting basically rescues Hal Bennett. They're in Denmark at this point, and he looks after him. And then basically, Hal Bennett becomes devoted to him. The Gideon character becomes devoted to Sting. There's a great bit. It was picked up by all the newspaper reviewers that Sting said, Hal Bennett says it's cold, and Sting says, "What is this cold?" He looks freezing.
With his bright red nose.
Yeah, exactly. He looks absolutely freezing when he says that, which is quite funny. But then at some point, Sting says that, we've got to go now. And then they take a trip into this...
Where? Where do they go, John? Where?
Well, on the set, it was called Geworfen.
Right.
It's a hellish landscape, a cityscape. And what they did was they merged the cityscapes of Liverpool and Birmingham.
That is a hellscape.
And it looks incredible, I think. Absolutely incredible. But what they do when they get there is they go on a tram. And I know that the tram footage was filmed at the Crich Tram Museum, because I've been there, the Crich Tram Museum.
In Derby, yeah.
In Derbyshire, yeah. And it was on the front page of the Derby Evening Telegraph that Sting had been in Crich. It was a red letter day. That this had happened. They're in this city, and there's a constant tannoy making incomprehensible announcements with little interruptions of a kind of du-du-du-du noise, which is really unsettling after a while. What is even more unsettling is that all the people on the tram have got tuberculosis and are coughing blood.
It's horrific.
It is horrific, and the language is apparently Estonian, spoke backwards.
It reminds me of Blade Runner. That whole sequence in this dystopian nightmare with all these different people gathered around and the loudspeakers broadcasting.
Yeah,
It's ahead of its time in that respect.
I mean, it is incredible. And what I love about all of this, and this is the thing, and they even refer to it a few times in the text, is when I first watched it, I can't really remember because I was a kid, but when I watched it again, you think when you're watching it that because Hal Bennett has been blown up, that it's some kind of reverie and dream. And what's great about it is it isn't. Mm-hmm. That's what I think is really powerful and really strong about it, is that at one point he says, I must be asleep, I will wake. And you don't. You don't wake.
Is it a parallel universe? I think that's the way I read it.
Yeah, I think so, because you end up with, you get separated from Sting. It's like Gideon has to go and do what he needs to do, which is basically save the world, as we find out later. He then bumps into a sort of, as you say, alt-universe version of Gwen, who's got blonde hair and speaks in backwards Estonian. And he chases after her into what is Liverpool Cathedral. Apparently, Liverpool Cathedral couldn't have been more welcoming. They cleared out all the pews to make it this incredible wide open space. And it's got this, and so, we might as well say it now, some of it is very Lynchian, I think.
Very.
David Lynch. When they start walking, I'd love to know if you ever saw it. When they're walking in, there's this brilliant scene where Gideon's walking in, and you see a kid just runs out of nowhere, and a dog goes by, and it's quite a high angle, and it's just terrific, I think. All those bits are really brilliant. Gideon then finds that the blonde-haired version of Gwen is hanging herself from a church bell and has to try and rescue her while Azrael, the baddie, is circling around underneath. And this continues. He can't possibly describe all of the completely weird things that happen. But then he ends up in a kind of...
bunker.
A bunker, yeah, this underground, which again looks amazing.
It's like something out of Doctor Who.
It is. It's Doctor Who. It's not entirely dissimilar to the Edge of Darkness bits where they go. It just, and the thing we should add is that one of the criticisms afterwards, when everybody was going, "What the hell was this?" was pick up on the fact that it cost loads of money.
Did it?
It cost loads of money. David Rose was, or other people behind the production were on the front foot about it, because they were basically saying, if this had been made by Hollywood, it would have been directed by Steven Spielberg and cost millions of dollars, and no one would have batted an eyelid. But because we're doing a 3-hour sci-fi epic for £500,000 or something like that, but at the time that's a lot of money. And when he goes into the bunker, he finds the various sort of family members are all being held, including Jed, the film lecturer, and Gwen is in there as well. There is a comment about Gwen says that she felt, after she came back from the ferry, she felt a terrible, devastating depression, but didn't kill herself because she's in love with Gideon, which is an explanation of why she didn't kill herself when the other ones did. But basically then, can you describe what happens after he finds Gwen?
Well, that's the most infuriating thing, I think, about the whole thing, is that you think you're going to get some kind of explanation. There seems to be some kind of plan that's going on. People on phones going, phase 1 is now complete. And you're going, oh, great, there's actually a plan. They're going to explain it, but it's just so obtuse.
Seal the project.
I'm sorry?
Seal immediately.
There's still one transport due up out from there.
Cancel. Keep it below. Seal now.
The technology will not permit that.
Override.
Impossible. The release shaft must open for each upcoming transport until the Phase 1 program is complete. Aside from any question whom this last transport will be bringing.
Well, expedite those to the surface, then seal.
They break the fourth wall a couple of times. At one point, Gwen actually starts reading out camera directions. Or she basically says the screen turns white, which I think is them going back into the real world, I think. I don't know.
And Gideon breaks the fourth wall right at the very end.
He does, yes.
Yeah, when he talks about how he's got a limp in both legs now.
And it all ends with this sort of battle in a cathedral where he has to overcome his vertigo in order to save humanity, because I believe they're going to be poisoned by the statue breaking because the organ's playing a certain note. I don't know.
Yeah, they get Jack... Neil, it's okay, you're not alone, it's fine, don't worry. But Drachenfels is trying to signal to Gideon and Gwen to stop it happening, isn't he?
With the hidden notes.
There's hidden notes he gives them. He gives them a score which has got hidden notes in it. That's why Gideon starts to understand what's going on. So, yeah, you end up with this climax, which, in theory, is going out live on Radio 3. And it's quite funny because the Radio 3 producer is smoking a pipe and is obviously a piss take of Radio 3 producer. So in the middle of this, you've got that kind of thing going on as well.
And another famous face, or voice, I should say.
Oh, yes, of course. It's
Grace Archer.
Grace Archer, Alpha
Centauri, yeah.
is in there as well. Yeah, your San Churchman is there.
But we begin with a work by Bach, which Dr. von Drachenfels is substituting for the item advertised.
So at the end, Gideon climbs up, puts the statue together and deliberately falls, and that means that Azrael gets impaled.
Like Dracula.
Defeated, and poor old Drachenfels goes back to his house and it's on fire and he dies with his wife in the Inferno. And then Gwen and Gideon go back to Denmark. And... by Magog's grave, and he puts his arm around her. So I think we're supposed to that signifies that maybe
he's come on a journey.
He's got exactly. It's like Strictly. Like Strictly Come Dancing, he's gone on the journey, hasn't he? Yeah, it's extraordinary. Oh, and then you see Sting is left on his planet crying, or sighing rather.
But why? Why is he upset? I thought he wanted this to happen. I don't understand any of it, frankly, and it makes me feel stupid for not understanding it. But I must confess, I did enjoy it, and I haven't stopped thinking about it. I think that's it. Sort of worms its way into your brain,
Yeah,
and refuses to let go. It's like a nightmare. It's the whole thing from beginning to end. It's like a waking nightmare.
Produkti. Ejentisedu ja atnef no dunat uvas produktises egrok emesat. Ailivaret sikur aske hysat tusant tuni. Reak aske haksat tusant tuni. Emy aske hys aske hak SIH syuk siid ilen blok skak sku.
I think some of the fun is trying to spot all the references to so many different pieces of popular culture, not just Ingmar Bergman and Hitchcock, but Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It reminded me of that a lot, and Rudkin mentions it in the commentary track on the DVD. These people being compelled by these supernatural alien forces to converge on a location, and then that location's finale is all about keyboard playing and organs. So there's a definite link there. So it's not just highfalutin references to, like, auteurs and Swedish cinema.
I think it's actually Rudkin is quite Catholic in his taste in that respect. I don't think he's all about the highfalutin. I mean, somebody mentions The Prisoner, the end of The Prisoner, and it's definitely there. And he says yes, he says absolutely, I think, or something like that. But there's lots of bits where it really reminded me at times of bits in Twin Peaks where they go into the next realm or into the Black Lodge or whatever. It's that kind of thing. The dialogue is so weird. I mean, it's weird all the way through. But after a certain point, everybody starts talking like Yoda. the kind of structure, the syntax makes no kind of sense at all.
It's very Brechtian, isn't it?
It is. And two things may be worth mentioning. I'm joking about the golf ball typewriter, but one of the lovely things about that is obviously that was cutting edge tech at the time. And there's a great bit where Hal Bennett, keep forgetting, deletes the word he's written, which is sexuality, I think.
Yeah, it's a bit on the nose.
And the golf ball typewriter that's in that program, which was in fact Rudkin's own, is now in the IBM museum.
You can visit the Artemis 81 typewriter. That's good to know.
Exactly, and worship at it, and read. Hopefully, the font catalogue is with it as well, so we can look through that. The other thing that's that's in there is, as you mentioned, is about Vertigo. And the thing that's weird at the time about Vertigo is that, Hitchcock fans will know this, but Hitchcock deliberately suppressed 4 or 5 of his films from about late 60s kind of time, and refused to let them be re-released in the cinema. So they became much prized, and apparently, I've read, one of the reasons for him doing it was to sort of build a nest egg for his family. And of course that worked, because with Vertigo was commonly either first or second placed in the best films ever made, because it had achieved this kind of allure, because of mystique, because nobody could watch it. Obviously Rudkin wanted to use this, and Reed wanted to use imagery from it, but both of them had seen it and really liked the film, but they couldn't remember exactly what happened in it, because they hadn't seen it for years. So basically, they found out that someone in a Paris Cinematheque, the Cinematheque in Paris, had a copy of it, but they weren't allowed to project it. But they managed to finagle a screening on a moviola. So Reed desperately sketched the images that he saw on the moviola, and they're the sketches that you see in the film lecture. And that was like the first time for years that actual images of what Vertigo looked like had been available. So really incredible amount of effort gone to get those in there.
My feelings for anything human all dried up. Only a 360 shot from Vertigo can bring the living water to my eyes.
And also, weirdly, the same thing then happened to Artemis 81 in the sense that no one saw this again for years and years.
No, because it didn't fit on an E180 or a CD-R.
It was never repeated, was it?
No, certainly never repeated.
How did it go down with the audience?
With the audience?
We do have access, don't we, to the Audience Appreciation Index?
Yes, we do. It was a low reaction index of 43. It says, the reaction to Artemis 8-1 was one of almost total mystification, as very few reporting viewers felt they had any idea of what was going on.
Oh, not just me then.
The great majority were unable to follow the storyline, and most gave up before the end, as they had neither the time nor the inclination to see if the conclusion of the play brought enlightenment. The reporting complained that one scene seemed to have nothing to do with the next, and the story failed to develop a logical flow. A number found the beginning particularly difficult to get into, whilst others admitted defeat after Gideon's rescue from the cliff.
Yeah, that's a cut-off point for a lot of people, I bet.
Yeah, and Artemis 8-1 would have been improved by some judicious cutting, which might also have made it more comprehensible.
Yeah. Now, doesn't David Rudkin himself complain about the editing? Yeah, I don't think he was very happy, because I think David Rose wasn't very hands-on towards the end.
Well, David Rose had gone, and Rudkin was kept out of the editing room. There's no way in a million years that Rudkin wouldn't have been involved with the editing of Artemis 8-1 if Rose had still been there.
I think that's the main detriment to the programme, is that it's just too long. If they'd have cut it in half, like they originally envisaged. And
they are different, aren't they, the two parts? I mean,
very
whether or
much,
not,
yeah.
give or take a minute or so where we think the break would have been. I think if you'd watched that, you might have been intrigued by it. But then if you'd then seen the second episode, which is full on disturbing, that might have been its own entity as well.
So, would you recommend Artemis 81?
Absolutely.
And by the way, the reason I'm calling it Artemis 81 instead of 81 is because Rudkin complains about the fact that the BBC, when they released it on DVD, they made it look like a year. But Artemis 81 being the year makes more sense as a title than Artemis 81. He says, it's not a year, it's a star. That's never explained in the script. Yeah. Not once.
But I quite like that. Anyway, the thing is, the kicker is that if you watch the opening credits, when it types out Artemis space 8, space 1, there's a space between the 8 and the 1. So it's incontrovertible.
Okay. So, yeah, would you recommend it?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm far from saying it's perfect, but I think there are some things in it which are so good, it's worth the ride. Oh, the other thing we should mention, of course, is that during the filming process, when Sting was on the edge of a cliff and David Rose was there, David Rose saw that Sting was fiddling around with something around his ears, and that was how David Rose got introduced to the Sony Walkman.
And what was he listening to?
He was listening to Wagner.
Of course he was.
Sting lifted off his headphones, put them onto David Rose, and David Rose was startled by the volume of the Wagner that was coming out. I mean, it's a great way to be introduced to the Sony Walkman by Sting.
At least somebody got something out of this. No, I do recommend it. If you can see it, hunt it out and make the effort. You'll never forget it. Trust me.
Absolutely not. It's great.
Okay, John. Before we go, I think we should give a big shout out to Ian Greaves for helping us with this episode.
Yes, Ian is incredibly knowledgeable about Rudkin, and he's putting that to good use because we're very excited because he's written a book about Penda's Fen scene by scene. It's been published by 10 Acre Films, who are a great publisher at the moment. They're putting out some great stuff, including recently Toby Haydock's Quatermass book. It's an incredibly in-depth deep dive into Penda's Fen. Some of the stuff that Ian's dug out has never been heard of before, so I'm greatly looking forward to that. It's out the week we're recording. The publication date was 23rd of June.
If you like this podcast, please like and subscribe and tell your friends. Until next time, I've been Neil.
And I've been John.
And you've been listening to The World of Telly.
Goodbye from the world of Telly.
All picture is white.